Because if there are problems in Greece, I think it's possible that the economic problems in Portugal and Ireland may in a couple of years' time be even worse than the situation in Greece. So this issue simply isn't going to go away, and frankly I think the German people have been taken to be the mugs of Europe. You're the ones that have been picking up the tab, and your politicians clearly are prepared to pay any price to maintain their European dream and their European project, and to hell with you, the people. So it's very, very apposite that you're here today. And the situation is getting worse because the ECB are busy buying up what are effectively junk government bonds in the marketplace, and this is going to lead to trouble. You know, the billionaire investor George Soros, who knows a thing or two about currencies, said due to its history, Germany is more worried about inflation than about recession. In the rest of the world, it is exactly the other way round. So I don't believe that Germany's interests are served by being part of this monetary union. I don't believe you can have Greece and Germany together in the same currency union. Perhaps in the end it will prove to have been just a cohabitation rather than a marriage. But I'm afraid your Chancellor Merkel seems to use every crisis that exists within the Eurozone or within the EU project, and she and her fellow fanatics, people like Martin Schulz, who leads the socialist group in the European Parliament and who simply can't control his rage and anger against me whenever I dare to say something against the project. But they really have manipulated this Euro crisis, and it's not just, of course, that you're being asked to bail out the countries in trouble, but there are now plans afoot to put in place a full economic government based in Brussels, whereby you as a nation would even have to submit your budget every year to the unelected European Commission for approval. So that's the way we're going. And I have to say that it is time the Germans stood up and said that you've simply had enough. You're not going to pour any more money into this system. And you of all countries, I mean, you are proud, I think, of what you've done in the last 50 or 60 years. You've worked hard. You've built a good economy. You've believed in the principles of sound money. And now you've been merged with countries with a Mediterranean climate and culture who look at things entirely different. It isn't that you're better than them, and it isn't that you're worse than them, but it is that you are different to them. And you should be managing your own country, your own economy, in your own interests. This whole project, the euro, it wasn't about economics, you know. It was always about politics. It was about forcing people together. Now, clearly it's not working. Clearly it isn't working. And so some pretty big decisions have to be made. Either Greece and Ireland and Portugal bomb out of the euro, or perhaps the braver way of looking at it is that perhaps Germany ought to say that it's time that actually she took back the Deutschmark, she took back control over her own national life. I know that may seem unlikely at the moment, but how well I can remember coming to Berlin back in the 1980s when it seemed that the Berlin Wall would be there forever. And everybody thought the Berlin Wall would be there forever, but great events in history can happen very quickly. So I hope that at some point in time you really get the opportunity to say, as a modern Germany, that like us, you believe in cooperation. Like us, you believe in trading freely. Like us, you will sit round a table and we'll agree and we'll negotiate environmental standards. We'll agree and negotiate some minimum safety standards. We'll do all of those things, but that we will operate as our own functioning national democracies. That's the vision of the future. And I think there is a movement here in Germany, not just in this room, but I've been a fan for some time of Dr. Roman Herzog, your former president, who, if you remember, commissioned that study, didn't he? Between 1998 and 2004, of what percentage of federal laws in Germany were made here as opposed to being made in Brussels. And it came up that 84% of your federal laws that were made between those years were not made by politicians that you can elect, were not made by politicians that you can get rid of and replace at another election, but they came to you straight from the institutions of the European Union. And Herzog himself said the question has to be raised of whether Germany can still unreservedly be called a parliamentary democracy. Well, clearly it can't, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll bring you other news from Brussels. Do not believe those that tell you that because we have a European Parliament, this project is democratic. It is not democratic. The people who have the sole right to propose legislation are the unelected bureaucrats in the European Commission. They are the people that design our laws. All we can do in the Parliament is to delay them a little bit. I'm often asked, well, Nigel, surely the rational thing, surely the logical thing is to fight to reform the European Union from within, to fight to democratise the European Union. And people say that, and they're genuine in their desire to push for it. But even to say that, ladies and gentlemen, is to fundamentally misunderstand what this project has been about from the very start. Jean Monnet, who was the author of this, hated the concept of democracy. Because with democracy, you have a government elected for a 4 or 5 year term, and they steer in that direction. But if at the next election you get a government of a different hue, they then veer off in another direction. Well, that's no good to people like Jean Monnet. That's no good to these great people who know better how we should live our lives than we do ourselves. No, these people have got 10, 20, 50-year plans. They've marked our futures out for us, and they do not want anything as inconvenient as democracy getting in the way. And that's where the Monnet method came from. That's where the sole right of the initiative of the European Commission came from. And if there was ever a moment at which this was going to be democratised, then it would have been at the time of the European Constitution. They could have used that opportunity to make the European Parliament the place from which the government of their new European state came from. Personally, I wouldn't have been in favour of that, because it still would have put, national delegations in a minority position. But they could have gone for it, and they could have put it to the peoples of Europe in referendums, and you know what? They probably would have won. But they didn't do that, did they? They kept everything absolutely the same. They synthetically made the European Parliament look a little bit more powerful than it was before, but the reality was that nothing's changed. And then, when the French said no, and the Dutch said no, they just chose to ignore them. And when little Ireland had the temerity to say no, they were forced and bullied into voting yes. That is the true face of this European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not just undemocratic, it is anti-democratic, and we it is our great historic task to fight for our nations, to fight for our democracies, to fight for our children and grandchildren to grow up as free people. We've made a start in the United Kingdom with this, and I believe here today in Berlin you have made a start too, and I thank you.